Great to have you back for another episode here at the Sportscasters Club. Today we're going to talk about, it started off, it was going to be one thing, one main thing that Kevin Burkhardt did fantastically well during his broadcast yesterday of the Super Bowl. But as I was going through my outline in my head of what I was going to talk about, I couldn't whittle it down to just one thing, even though there's one particular thing that I want to discuss that he did so great during his broadcast with Tom Brady on the Super Bowl. But I actually put together a list of three things because number one, if you're an aspiring sportscaster, you certainly need to focus on these three things that Kevin did perfectly well and did just a great job of during the Super Bowl broadcast. But also, if you're a sports fan and maybe you're just a casual fan and you watch the Super Bowl, chances are you noticed these three things even if you didn't consciously think about it. And I'm sure when I discuss each one, you're going to think, oh, yes, I noticed he did that. And so they're very important, especially the last one, because that's the one I was originally going to discuss. Things that Kevin Burkhardt did so great during this broadcast of the Super Bowl yesterday. But first, if we haven't met, my name is Rick. Thank you for tuning in. It really helps a lot if you like the videos, if they give you some value. And feel free to subscribe if you'd like to receive more content like this. We do a lot more at sportscastersclub.com as well. But this is a great place for you to learn if you want to be a better sports fan or if you want to pursue a career in sports broadcasting, because that's really what we focus on, helping people become a better sportscaster and a better sports fan. But let's talk about today's topic. Kevin Burkhardt did play-by-play for Fox yesterday in their broadcast of the Super Bowl. It was Burkhardt and Tom Brady. And in my estimation, yes, I know a lot of people are talking about the graphics and the scoreboard down at the bottom of the screen. It looked like it came out of Atari, from 30 years ago. It was pretty funny. I mean, I definitely noticed it. And then when I started scrolling on X at halftime or after the game, a lot of people noticed that as well. But that aside, I thought it was quite a good broadcast, not only technically, but specifically focusing on Burkhardt and Brady. And so I wanted to follow up on the previous video that I did where we talked about how Kevin Burkhardt was preparing for the Super Bowl broadcast. And so if you're preparing for a big game or you're curious, some of the things that a play-by-play broadcaster thinks about, you may want to go back and check out that video. But I wanted to do a recap and look back now at the broadcast, and because there were three things, as I mentioned, that Kevin did tremendously well. And like I said, I was going to talk about the third, but let's start with the three. And there were dozens and dozens of things I could have pointed out, but I just pulled out these three quickly. The first thing that I noticed from the minute I turned on the game, and I was back and forth in and out of the pregame. There were certain things I wanted to see in the pregame, but I'm generally not a big fan of pregame shows. I don't need to see Peyton Manning and Eli Manning kicking field goals out there. That's not usually what I'm going to consume my Sunday afternoon with. But the first thing I noticed with Kevin Burkhardt when he came on the air, he was happy. He was joyful to be there. He was excited. And I think that captures the mood of his audience, because whether you sat there and you watched 3 hours of a pregame show or more, or whether you turned on the game at 6 or 6:30, or maybe you missed a few plays, you missed a couple downs, whatever it is, you're at a party, you're having a drink, you're having a pig in a blanket, whatever it is, and then you go to focus on the game and now it's started. You first noticed that he was happy. He was pleasant. He smiled. And we take these things for granted because anyone that's broadcasting a Super Bowl is going to do that because they understand the moment, they understand their job, their role, and they understand what a festive, fun, exciting environment it is to be broadcasting a Super Bowl and for their audience as well. But it's something that all broadcasters should take into consideration, because whether it's a Tuesday night baseball game in the middle of May or a college basketball broadcast that you're doing in the middle of January, or a Super Bowl or a World Series or a high school game on a Friday night, a cold Friday night in November. You have to consider the fact that your audience is tuning in for that game for whatever reason, whether it's the Super Bowl and they're watching because everybody's watching, or whether it's a high school game and they're listening or watching because their nephew's playing or their niece is in the game, or maybe they're a graduate of that school, so they're tuning into the broadcast. Whatever the reason is that someone's tuning in, it's because they want to listen or watch that game. They want to listen to that game or watch that game for whatever reason. And so they're excited. They're anticipating it. They are looking forward to it for whatever reason. And in the Super Bowl, that's just ratcheted up amazingly high. And so when the first thing you see is Kevin Burkhardt on screen with Tom Brady, and they're both happy and they're excited and they're anticipating what's going to transcend over the next 3 hours, that matches the attitude of their audience. And that is so important. It's overlooked. But as you watch more sporting events and listen to more games, take a listen and take a notice if the broadcaster matches your anticipation. If anything, they should be higher than you because that's their job, to treat it as if it's their Super Bowl, regardless of what the game is. But you never want to be lower than your audience because if the audience is more excited to be there than you are, you might want to reconsider your career path. But ideally, you want to match the audience. So, for example, if I'm broadcasting a baseball game, let's say from my career in the minor leagues, if I was doing a Thursday night minor league game, that had a certain level of intensity. But a couple of the years, maybe 3 years that I was there, the teams made the playoffs. And that broadcast had a little higher intensity, a little more anticipation because of its importance. So you want to match where your audience is. And when Kevin came out there yesterday during the Super Bowl broadcast, he wasn't excitable, but he was excited. You could tell he wanted to be there. There was nowhere else he'd rather be. And in fact, that's probably the case for most of the audience because if they were watching the game, most likely they chose to, as opposed to doing anything else they could have been doing. They could have been preparing for the work week ahead. They could have been on a treadmill exercising. They could have been reading a book. But instead, they were watching this game. And Kevin met the audience with the anticipation level and the joy that the audience had. So that's number one. That was the first thing that I noticed that Kevin did just great during the broadcast, and he deserves a lot of credit. And Tom Brady did also. So that was number one. Number two, the second thing that I saw that Kevin did phenomenally well during the Super Bowl broadcast, he always does great. And it's not a surprise knowing how he started his career and worked his way up. And I'm going to explain that. And it has nothing to do with my broadcast history with him. I detailed that in the broadcast yesterday. So if you're curious about my relationship with Kevin, take a look at that broadcast and that episode. But specifically, I'm talking about the second thing Kevin did great yesterday was he got his color analyst involved. And that's really the mark of a true professional play-by-play broadcaster. When you ask questions to your color analyst, who in most cases is a former player, and in this case, possibly the greatest player ever in the NFL, certainly at that position, quarterback. How many times did Kevin ask Tom Brady a question about his memories from a game like this? That one line was pretty funny when he asked him about his memories of a game like this. And Tom Brady said, well, it's a blur. That one particular Super Bowl I played was a blur, but not the reason that a lot of people go on Bourbon Street and end up in a blur. It was because it was so long ago and it just went by so quickly. But that was a great way. It was a good response by Tom Brady, too. But it was a great way to get his color analysts involved in the game. And that's really what great play by play broadcasters do. They get the expert involved because that expert can bring something to the audience and a perspective to the audience that not everybody can do. As a play by play broadcaster, you weren't out there strapping it on and playing on the field in most cases. There are certain exceptions, but you want to ask those questions to the people who were. And the reason I said that it's no surprise to me that Kevin did that is Kevin came up through the ranks as a sideline reporter for the New York Mets. And one of the best play by play people out there in the business right now is Gary Cohen, who calls the Mets games on television. And one of the things Gary Cohen has done so well for decades is he gets his color analysts or multiple analysts. Can you hear the plural? Analysts. He gets them involved, whether it's Ron Darling, Keith Hernandez, or someone else. You know, a pitcher's in a tough spot, and he'll turn to Ron Darling and say, Ron, what would you be thinking now if you're on the mound? Because he knows Ron Darling has that perspective. Similar, he'll ask Keith Hernandez, Keith, with this tough 3-2 count, late in the ball game, a tie game, what pitch are you looking for? And he'll ask Keith that question because Keith was an offensive player. And he knows how to get that analyst involved because that's bringing tremendous value to the viewer and tremendous value to the listener if you're broadcasting a game on radio. Speaking of value, if you're finding this valuable, hit subscribe and you'll get all of our videos here on YouTube. Or if you're listening to the podcast, the audio, if you subscribe, you'll get them delivered right to your inbox right on your phone. But that's really the second thing that Kevin did so great yesterday. He got Tom Brady involved because who better to have as the color analyst of a Super Bowl than Tom Brady, who's been the staple of Super Bowls for a decade. It seemed like you'd never turn on a Super Bowl without seeing Tom Brady. Maybe Patrick Mahomes is now kind of becoming the contemporary version of that. But for anybody who's, let's say 20 years old and up, you went through a decade of seeing Tom Brady almost every Super Bowl, and it was great. And the fact that Kevin Burkhardt is smart enough, and obviously they talked about it, they discussed in their pregame meetings that led all the way up to the game, not just right before the game, but in the days and weeks prior to the game. They talked about what things they would discuss, what tosses he might give to Tom Brady to tee him up, to explain something that he had experienced. So Kevin did a great job with that, and I think that was so important. And sometimes it just looks like business as usual, but for a professional play-by-play announcer, it's very premeditated and it's pre-planned, and it's a great way to make it a better experience for your viewer or your listener. So those are the first two things that Kevin did great yesterday. And now I'm going to talk about the third one, which is really the topic of this video. I was going to make a whole video about this, but then I figured, how could I whittle it down to just one thing? So the third thing that Kevin Burkhardt did so great yesterday during the Super Bowl broadcast is not anything he did at all. In fact, that's the point. The game wasn't about him. See what I'm saying? It wasn't about him. It was about the Eagles. It was about the Chiefs. It was about their fans. It was about their season. It was about the challenges that they had leading up to this game and getting to this game. It was about the fans across the country, in Philadelphia, in Kansas City, and everywhere else, who were looking forward to this matchup. It was about the players on the field. It was about the fans in the seats. It wasn't about Kevin Burkhardt. And that, not only does that mean you're a polished professional play-by-play announcer, but it means you're self aware enough to put your ego aside and know that you're not the reason people are tuning in. And I think that's one of the reasons Fox identified Kevin Burkhardt as a star. Because think about it, people are tuned in to see the game, they're not tuned in to see him. Tom Brady may be a little different because he's obviously a notable NFL all-time great, an immortal player. But the great Marty Glickman, who was a pioneer of broadcasting on the radio in New York and around the country, he used to teach us at Fordham University, and he used to have it. He had a line that he would tell us that was so true. Whenever we got a little bit too big for our britches, or maybe we tried to insert a little too much personality, this was kind of at the same time ESPN and some of the other people were coming out with attitude and trying to, be the show as a broadcaster. That wasn't our philosophy. It's certainly not mine, and it wasn't Marty's. Marty said the only person that tunes into a game for the broadcaster is his mother. I think he makes a great point because people are tuned in to see the game. There's, other than maybe friends and family of Kevin, you could probably count them on a hand or two. The millions of people that are tuned into the Super Bowl are tuned in for the game. Whether it was Kevin Burkhardt, whether it was Al Michaels, whether it was Mike Tirico, it doesn't make a difference who the broadcaster was. They were either going to tune in or not based on the game. And that is one thing that when I say the most important thing Kevin Burkhardt did during the Super Bowl broadcast was something he didn't do at all, was he didn't make himself the center of attention. He didn't make himself the story. It's so annoying when you see a broadcaster with catchphrases and special lines and trying to amp up the crowd and his listeners and his viewers and just take away from the game. Certainly not my philosophy. If that's yours, great for you. Great for you. But it's certainly not what I've taught for decades and certainly not what we teach here at Sportscasters Club. We teach that people are tuned in for the game, whether it's on radio or on television. And as a play-by-play broadcaster, you want to facilitate that. You want to bring them into the action without being an obstacle, without being in their way, without being something they notice as an impediment. You don't want to be that annoying fan that's sitting in the row next to you that won't shut up or is so obnoxious or who's drunk or who's a jerk or who's opinionated, and you don't want to be that person. You want to be the fan that's sitting there enjoying the game, maybe keeping track on the scorecard, enjoying the game and not intruding on everybody else sitting in the row. And that's what a solid play-by-play broadcaster does. And that's what Kevin Burkhardt did yesterday. So if you want to learn how to become a better sportscaster, there's nobody better to watch than Kevin because he was happy. That was tip number one. He got his color analyst involved. That was tip number two. And most of all, he directed the focus of the audience where it belonged, on the game and not on him. And that shows a great level of professionalism to be able to put your ego aside to help people focus on the main reason they're there. And so I give him a lot of credit. Kevin did a fantastic job. It certainly won't be the last Super Bowl Kevin Burkhardt broadcasts. But regardless when you listen to this, I hope this helps give you more information and more color into what a play-by-play broadcaster is trying to accomplish. And I hope if you know someone who's an aspiring sportscaster, you share this with them because hopefully it can help them build a nice foundation for a career. And obviously, if you subscribe and you share these videos, that'll help as well. So I'm Rick. I'm glad you're here. It was a late night with the Super Bowl, but I knew you had to hear this today. And we look forward to giving you a lot more content here. So until next time, take care. Hope you learned something, and we'll see you in the next video. Okay, bye-bye.